Merry Christmas, happy holidays, everybody, whatever it is that you celebrate. Thank you for taking a moment here to stop into the channel for the Week 17 NFL Power Rankings. No camera work here today. I got to do things kind of the old-fashioned way here. I'm still kind of in the process of getting settled here. We'll be all set up in our new place January 1st, so right at the new year, I'll be able to kind of hit the ground running with playoffs, coaching carousel discussions, obviously NFL draft stuff just around the corner here. So thank you for your patience as content's been a little bit slow here around this move back to Minnesota and around the holidays here. But do make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss all of the great content we'll be having coming your way very soon. But without further ado, let's get into the Week 17 NFL Power Rankings. We have 2 weeks of new information to react to here because I didn't have a show last week. So just keep that in mind as you see these teams going up and down. We're also considering what happened in Week 15, not just 16. But starting at the bottom in the Tankathon tier, of course, the New York Giants, I think, have arguably set themselves apart. You can make a case they're a tier below this bottom tier. But to keep things simple, I'm just going to keep them all lumped together here at the bottom. And as much as I like Brian Daboll and am pulling for him and the Giants, frankly, this has been hard to see. You don't want to see him lose the locker room and for this team to just get so much worse as the season has gone on. And I know they've had injuries, but they just really don't have any fight right now. So definitely going to be a decision that needs to be made from the Mara family with the Giants here in a few weeks. And honestly, either way they go, I understand whichever direction they want to take there. Then at number 31, talk about potential coaching fires. If Doug Peterson wanted any chance of saving his job, if there was one to begin with, it had to start by beating the Raiders. And yet again, it's just crazy how bad the Jaguars are at the little things. 2 more fumbles in this game. They were lucky to avoid a third on a botched punt that bounced in the right direction. This team is just an absolute disaster. They need a complete reset. And then the Las Vegas Raiders at number 30, a very costly win. I'm not sure how much good that's going to do for them into the future. Maybe some Raiders fans happy to get a W this week. But just obviously dropping from the number 1 pick to the number 6 pick is a big, big deal. And there will be plenty of conversations as the draft order gets more solidified here. But I will say, just for whatever it is worth, Aiden O'Connell looked really good to me against the Jags, made some big, big throws, and even on kind of a bum leg, and it's not not a good athlete to begin with, he actually, extended some plays and made some stuff happen to really kind of, carry the Raiders offense to a victory. Obviously, Brock Bowers is incredible too, but, just for whatever that's worth, I'm not going to go any further than just giving him some praise, but, thought he made some, high-end plays happen. Then at number 29, the Cleveland Browns. Very little to say about them as they trek along this season, losing another one this week to the Bengals with Dorian Thompson-Robinson out there as their starter. And then to round out the Tankathon tier, the Tennessee Titans at number 28. Just a little interesting note here, because I have to make this video from my laptop. The last sort of template I had from this graphic was from after week 1, and the Tennessee Titans were 28th after week 1. So that to me was just kind of a reflection on their season and the first year of the Callahan era here. You want to see more growth, and sure, they put up some points trying to catch up against the Colts when they were down 38-10, and maybe that ignites something schematically speaking with Callahan and this offense. But the Levis project did not work out. It feels like they're right back where they started the season, and it's just not where you want to be after 1 year with this new regime. It's going to be a big second season for Coach Callahan, because I just don't know what you look back on from this Titans season and say, oh yeah, that's something they can build upon. I guess the interior of the defensive line comes to mind, but beyond that, there's just not a ton to say. But we are going to jump up to the next tier. This is going to be the Playing for Pride tier, teams that are just a little bit more competitive week to week, I suppose. than the last 5, though the New Orleans Saints starting this tier off at number 27. Like I said, we're reflecting on the last 2 weeks here, and while they embarrassed themselves last night on Monday Night Football, the first team to get shut out this season, and it really is a bummer that Desmond Ridder, I feel like, clearly not ready, probably pushed into action sooner than he should have been as a bit of a project quarterback. Looked really, really bad. But you go back a week ago, and Ridder led a comeback against the Commanders, a very, very good team. So you go back a week ago, this team is still scrappy, even though I think what we definitely saw is, against the Commanders, not the best line play, right? They've got a lot of good stuff going for them, but O-line, D-line, they've got a lot of work to do with those groups in Washington. And New Orleans, that's a massive, massive priority. So they go against Washington, they can win in the trenches a little bit more and make it a close game. Against Green Bay, they just could not hang against good offensive and defensive lines. So to me, that has to be a priority for New Orleans. They have just let those two groups get entirely decimated over the last few years. But then the New England Patriots at number 26, they've been feisty for the vast majority of the time with Drake May as their quarterback. And man, to start that Bills game, I don't want to play this down. There was a couple of drives in there to start the game where Drake May was playing elite quarterbacking, just high-end decisions, the big-time throws, the playmaking, the legs, all of it. Now, as the game went on, he cooled off, and certainly the offense cooled off. It'd be virtually impossible for anybody to play 60 minutes of elite quarterbacking with that offensive line and those skill players, let alone a rookie. So, a +1 for the Patriots. They're in about as good of a spot as you possibly could have asked for, I think, as a Patriots fan heading into the year, where Drake May looks like a dude, and they're looking at a top 3 or 4 pick right now. So they're actually in a pretty solid spot. And then the Jets at number 25, they're jumping up a spot here because I do think they are better than the Saints at this point in time, but that's really all I have to say. They win last week against the Jags. They lose this week against the Rams. I tweeted this out, but it's been fun to see Rodgers and Adams kind of reestablish their chemistry and balling out together, frankly. But it's like the last couple of Star Wars movies in the most recent trilogy where they give you that nice nostalgic hit. They bring back the characters we love. And then after 20 minutes of watching, you realize this is just a paint of coat over what is otherwise a steaming pile of shit. And that's where the Jets are at. One of the most fascinating off seasons to follow, I think, for the Jets, not just with what happens with Rodgers, but kind of what direction do they want to take this organization. And then the Chicago Bears at number 24. I was putting this together and I was like, there's no way the Chicago Bears are as high as the 24th team in football. I mean, they're terrible. They just dropped their 9th straight game. Granted, they've had a very challenging schedule, but you'd think they'd at least sneak 1 or 2 in there, given that they do have a talented roster. But when it came down to it, I just don't know who I would push above the Bears here, because then you're complimenting another extremely bad football team. This is a lot of bad teams in the league in general this year. But how disappointing for the Chicago Bears. All you can really do is hope that they nail this coaching hire this offseason. And on that note, I just want to say they had to fire Eberflus. It needed to be done. But I've always said he's a really good defensive coach. And since they fired him, their defense has been a travesty. So now it's like they just have created more problems, seemingly. Even if it's the right thing to do, it adds another big question mark in there. And this team just has a lot of work to do. And then to round out the playing for pride tier, the Carolina Panthers at number 23. Unfortunately for them, they get a huge win. What feels like the biggest win for the Panthers in a long time. And just by the way, the cards kind of fell here. Ironically, they beat the Cardinals this week. But by the way the cards fell, they're actually going to go down a spot because, as we'll see, the Cowboys are actually playing really good football. The Cowboys spanked the Panthers in week 15. So that's considered as well here. But that's the only reason the Panthers are falling. But obviously this is an encouraging week for the Panthers. Another good Bryce Young week. They pick up a win. Chuba Hubbard is just a genuine star running back. The offensive line has been so fun this season. So, Carolina, really this has been about a best case scenario for the Panthers, is that they've gotten better as the year's gone on, and Bryce is for the damn, long foreseeable future, if that makes sense. I don't know that he's fully established himself as a franchise quarterback and all that, but he's definitely bought himself some runway and has played some really good ball since coming off the benching. So feeling good about where Carolina's at despite the -1. Now, before we jump up to this next tier here, now is a great time to get signed up over at Underdog. If your fantasy football playoffs are done, whether you lost or just you won and your fantasy season's over, or if you don't have a lot of rooting interest in your team because maybe you're a fan of the 10 teams we just talked about, well, Underdog has got you covered to give you just a little bit of extra something to be interested in every given football game. We're going to have a ton of island games with Saturday football, Christmas football, and Underdog pick'ems are the best way to keep you glued to your seat with small level entries, chances at massive payouts as well. You pick your favorite player stats, whether it's passing yards, fantasy points, select higher or lower. And if you hit on all of your selections, you get those big payouts we were talking about. Another favorite of mine too is if you have that itch to do a draft, you can do playoff best ball, which is really fun because you don't just have to draft the best players. You have to draft the best players on the teams that you think will go further. So it's kind of like a double dip in terms of trying to pick the playoffs while also playing fantasy. So that's really fun too. And if you sign up using code TFG, Underdog will give you a bonus match up to $1,000, and you will support my channel in the process. But let's go to the next tier here. This is a new tier this week, and this is a tribute to a classic old song that I discovered from the Fallout video game series, so my gamer friends out there might appreciate this one. But this is the It's All Over But the Crying tier. 3 teams here that I do consider still better than the previous teams we talked about, but teams that are definitely eliminated, and all of these teams at some point had a level of expectations, a couple of them from before the year, but our number 22 team here, the Arizona Cardinals, definitely a disappointing finish to the season when they established some mid-season expectations. They go and lose 4 out of their last 5 games, falling heavily from what was first place in the NFC West. And it's not the end of the world. They lose in overtime against the Panthers. Their defense and their lack of talent on that side of the ball was very much felt this week in a way that it hadn't been felt for chunks in the middle of the season. And I still think Jonathan Gannon's doing a good job with that defense, but it's just really hard to put up good defensive performances when at the end of the day, you might have the least talented defense in the league, other than maybe the team they were facing this week in Carolina. But that obviously it's just going to make things tough. And at the end of the day, I think that the Cardinals are ahead of schedule still, but you have to be, and I'm a huge Kyler defender, but you have to be pretty discouraged by kind of how he's played down the stretch. It's not even, part of it is like he's making some mistakes. He's missing some reads. Like his baseline has just been very average, which you obviously want to be well above average. But you're also just not really getting the sensational plays from him either. And I want to see him go out and, be a playmaker, use his legs, do that fantastic stuff that he is very much capable of and has at points in the season. It's almost like now that the team's been winning and they've got a defense and a run game, he's kind of like sheltered up a little bit, and that's just not necessary. So he's not playing within himself, and he's just not playing all that well. So they got to kind of find a way to discover that high-end version of Kyler Murray more consistently next year. They got to find a way to get that connection with Marvin Harrison going. That'll be a big thing to look for next year. And then, of course, they just need better line play, specifically on the defense. But I think O-line could definitely benefit from some upgrades there too. So it's a -4 with really a devastating loss in Carolina because they'd still be in play for the division if they had won that game. But they lose it in overtime. Their season's over, and it will be on to hopefully them having a nice offseason ahead. I do think that front office has a lot to prove that they can, up the ante a little bit with this group. But then at number 21, the Dallas Cowboys. Hey, for all the Mike McCarthy jokes, for all the Cooper Rush jokes, it's just a tip of the cap, man. They have played really good football. The defense has just been kind of swarming, man. It's the Micah Parsons effect. He just changes all the math. But getting a guy like Deron Bland back, a playmaking corner, he has the game ender. to a really nice play to rip the ball out of Rachaad White's arms, right? It was Rachaad White. But offensively, too, I mean, Cooper Rush is just genuinely playing well for what you would expect out of him. And they've really gotten CeeDee Lamb going, who just had a monster night against the Bucs. So there's some life in there for Dallas, and it'll be interesting to see kind of what they do with McCarthy here. Anyone that's followed this channel knows I'm not the biggest Mike McCarthy fan, but a lot of these other teams that we've already talked about, right? Jacksonville, the Giants, the Browns, they have let their season just completely spiral out of control, whereas McCarthy and the Cowboys have gotten things under control. So they're a tough, kind of feisty team, kind of playing spoiler right now. Very well might have ruined the Bucs season a couple nights ago. But then the 49ers, they dropped their second in a row, and just a really unfortunate season timing-wise to have all these injuries. And I think you're feeling the weight on that organization, because I really do think they know, like, this was supposed to be a special football team. Kind of the last year with the majority of these pieces really all together. They kind of stretch out that Ayuk deal when they were debating whether or not they need to do that. Now you're going to have to pay Purdy in this offseason. And I still think they will do that, though with how he's played the last couple of weeks, there's maybe some more conversations to be had there in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I mean, I don't even really have that much analysis about this. It just sucks. Like, they have been absolutely decimated by injuries at the absolute worst of times. And they're going to have to it's not going to be a rebuild, but they're going to have to dig deep. And, fortunately, they've got some young players playing well from this draft class that will help. Guys like Dominique Cuny has been an absolute stud. And Renardo Green, the corner out of Florida State, like they're filling in some spots in this roster, which is nice. But they've definitely lost their mojo and are going to have to try to get it back next year. But that is all we've got for this third tier. And now we will jump up to... This is being mean, but it's kind of being honest. This tier for me are the playoff pretenders. All of these teams are in the mix and might steal 4 seeds and 7 seeds and 6 seeds and all that stuff. But just teams that, it's not to say they aren't kind of, solid to good playoff caliber teams. It's just nobody in this group I see with legitimate Super Bowl level upside because of a lack of upside or too many holes. And this group is going to start with the Indianapolis Colts. They beat the Titans, putting up 38 points, really just with the run game. Jonathan Taylor, just a monster week, clearly took his fumble against the Broncos last week. That was probably the most critical mistake that any player has made this year, because it was a total shift in that game. Instead of going up 17-7 in a must-win game against Denver, who you're trying to take their playoff spot, you go back last week, and we can talk about that because it's included in this week's power rankings. He fumbles it out the back of the end zone, so instead of 17-7, you've got 10-7. Denver gets all the momentum back. They go take the lead, and things spiral out of control with a trick play that they may or may not have run if they were up 17-7. So he responds to that with one of the running back performances of the season. There's been a lot of great ones this year, but holy hell, that was old school Jonathan Taylor, top 3 back in the league, paired with Anthony Richardson running hard. That's really all they needed. Richardson, I would say, hasn't looked that great throwing the ball the last couple of weeks, but at least in this recent week against Tennessee, it didn't matter, because with that O-line and that run game, that's all they needed. And we talked about that heading into the year. Like, this has ridiculous potential, and this was that on display against Tennessee. So they're in the mix, but I definitely would put them last in this tier. Defense is still very frustrating, and I would like to see them move on from Gus Bradley this offseason and just get a little bit more stable on that side of the ball. But then at number 18 and number 17, I'll just reveal these guys together. The Bucs and the Falcons. I didn't fully know what to do with these teams. A pair of very polarizing weeks, right? For the Bucs, last week they crushed the Chargers in one of their biggest season wins of the season, and then they come out and have probably the most disappointing loss on the season in a huge spot, knowing with Atlanta having won, they would fall to second place in the division if they lost, and they just didn't play sound football. And Baker, frankly, scares me right now. He's very quarter to quarter. He's got great quarters. We saw a lot of that against the Chargers. Their run game has been really good too. But at any given moment, he could chuck the ball to the defense, play into his favorite quarterback, his favorite all-time quarterback, Brett Favre, kind of have that gunslinging mentality and have some bad moments. I just don't know how much I trust the Bucs right now, especially when they just aren't healthy on defense, and they're just not super reliable on that side of the ball either. So, bit of a roller coaster couple of weeks for the Bucs, but unfortunately, not only are they going to have to settle in and take care of things for themselves, but they're going to need a little bit of luck if they want to get in. But ultimately, obviously, in this playoff pretenders tier, I don't think any of the major players in the NFC are really all that scared of having to go to Tampa Bay potentially in the first week of the playoffs. But then the Falcons at number 17, my interest is definitely peaked, and they have won 2 in a row. We got to remember that. And I was against the Raiders and the Giants. So you got to take that with a grain of salt. But the defense has played much better. And even if they kind of slipped up week 14 against the Vikings, I do think over the last 5 weeks or so, we've seen that D-line come alive a little bit. And that's just a huge, huge deal just to get something from that group instead of having the worst pass rush in the league. So that's definitely a huge part of this. But then obviously going to Michael Penix. Everybody's going to want my opinion on Michael Penix, how he played in his rookie debut. To me, it was almost like an extended preseason game in week 15 for Penix. The Giants are just so bad, and the Falcons reached a point very quickly where they didn't need to ask really anything from Michael Penix. The run game was working, and the defense scored 2 touchdowns. The game was really over before it got started. But there definitely wasn't really any bad in there for Michael Penix. I think he looked in control of the offense. The arm looked nice. I think he looked comfortable facing an NFL pass rush, if you can call that Giants defensive line an NFL pass rush. So, it looked encouraging, but I also don't want to jump to any big conclusions either from that game. This is a really fun, big, but nice opportunity here. Sunday Night Football, they go to Washington. It's a huge spot, a primetime moment. We know Penix from his college days. He lives up to the moment. So it's a really good opportunity to kind of shine, but also against a defense that I think he's going to have an opportunity to shine against. So that's going to be a really fun game, and that's going to really tell us where the Falcons sit. Between them and the Bucs, they're very different teams in a very similar situation and similar caliber of teams, even if they arrive in that spot in 2 entirely different ways. I lean towards the Falcons. I just think they're a little bit more stable, but obviously this is going to play out over the next couple of weeks. Then at number 16, the Miami Dolphins staying put. They have a really ugly game, an ugly loss against the Texans last week, where the offense looked as bad as it's looked in the Mike McDaniel era, to a just egregiously terrible performance against the Texans. And then they turn around and beat the Niners. Big Devon Achane game. I think one big takeaway for the Dolphins, and something that they do have, is this defense is playing well. Anthony Weaver has these guys flying around, and they have really found their identity offensively with guys like Devon Achane and Jonnu Smith, frankly, being the kind of focal points of their offense with this quick-hitting screen game and horizontal run game. They've found their identity. They understand how they need to win football games at this point in time, and obviously it's leading to some wins. They're very much in the mix in this sort of race for the 7 seed in the AFC. They don't have a great chance, but they're alive, and they're playing pretty damn solid football. 16 feels like exactly the right spot for the Dolphins right now. Then at number 15, the Seattle Seahawks, a massive fall for them. The last time we had these power rankings a couple weeks ago, we were glazing them up, talking about just how positive things are, the direction they're heading in, and then they turn around and totally shit the bed. Not so much against the Vikings. It was a competitive game, but you are seeing Geno just making too many costly mistakes in big moments. And, the defense wasn't able to do what it's done the last 2 weeks, really in the Vikings game. And then you go back to the Packers game. It's a big reason for this -6 fall. They got just decimated by Green Bay. Both these games in Seattle, it kind of feels like a couple weeks ago was 2 steps forward, and this is 1 step back. Though I think they do rank lower than they did before that jump up into, I think, the top 10. But yeah, definitely just discouraging. They just don't have any semblance of consistency on offense. DK Metcalf has been a massive disappointment for them, frankly. Just really kind of sad, frankly. And I like DK Metcalf, but really kind of sad that he is genuinely one of the softest wide receivers in the league when he looks like a defensive end and is still one of the fastest wide receivers in the league. Just a complete freak that doesn't play like it. I think you see Geno put a lot of trust in him because of his upside, and he just doesn't consistently deliver there. At least Jackson Smith and Jigba has sustained this breakout as just, you can't say the best slot wide receiver in the NFL because Amon-Ra St. Brown exists. But we did talk about the upside for JSN was something like an Amon-Ra St. Brown, and you're seeing him get damn close to that at this point. So that's definitely encouraging, at least. And overall, I still like the direction that this team's going with Mike McDonald. But they definitely have felt, obviously, much more beatable in the last couple of weeks and have totally opened up the door for the Rams to win the NFC West. Then the Denver Broncos at number 14. They've been kind of hovering around this spot for the last 10 weeks, seemingly. I think we feel pretty damn good about who the Broncos are. They're a really well-coached, tough team with a solid young quarterback that just needs more difference makers. And against the Chargers last Thursday night, Justin Herbert was a difference maker. They didn't have any answers to that. They didn't have a superstar pass rusher that could shut him down. They didn't have a quarterback or an elite run game or some dynamic superstar wide receiver or anything that could really, open the game back up, as Justin Herbert played such a sensational second half in that game. And as we project that into the playoffs, they aren't Super Bowl contenders. And I don't really think any Broncos fan would tell you that. They've had a really successful, overachieving season, but they have really just kind of quite literally run out of horses to reach that next level. And then at the top of this tier, I have the Cincinnati Bengals. And ultimately, I do believe that they belong in this tier because I just don't trust this defense that they could genuinely go on a 4-game playoff run to win a Super Bowl. But they are definitely the most dangerous of these AFC wildcard teams that could get in. Because, I'll put it this way. If they do beat the Broncos this upcoming Sunday, and this week is a prime example of kind of my process with these power rankings on full display this week. Yes, the Broncos are 9-6. The Bengals are 7-8, but you are not as simply as good as your record says you are. I do think the Bengals are a better team than the Broncos right now, and Vegas in the gambling market agrees. The Bengals are 3.5-point favorites against the Broncos this week. And Broncos fans, if you don't like that, well, put your money where your mouth is. Go bet on your team. But I'm definitely willing to bet that teams like the Bills and the Texans, the Ravens, they're going to be Broncos fans this weekend because Joe Burrow is playing at an MVP level. Jamar Chase is playing at an offensive player of the year type of level in a year that are crazy good years for both of those awards, right? It's going to be tough to take that from Saquon Barkley if you're Jamar Chase. But you have the best quarterback wide receiver duo in the league that they're just lighting people up right now. And the plays that Joe Burrow is making to try to lead this miracle run for the Bengals, it reminds me of the Aaron Rodgers run the table year, when I still think the last 6 or 7 weeks of that Packers season is some of the highest level quarterbacking play I've ever seen in a 2-month stretch. Joe Burrow is up at that level right now. Like, obviously the stuff he's doing in structure, pushing the ball downfield with accuracy, but some of these improvisational plays, he's making like 1 or 2 a week. This week, throwing a touchdown like in midair, hovering like Superman, basically, somehow able to keep his knee off the ground and then still complete a pass in the end zone for a touchdown. Like, he is just playing at an absurd level. And to be honest, the defense has like settled down a little bit, just enough for them to win these games. So the Bengals are scary right now, and this isn't the first time that they've heated up late. I guess I'm not going to say this team, it's impossible that they could win a Super Bowl. I do think they have an upside that these previous 6 teams don't have, given their experience and their quarterback. But I do think that's still putting the cart before the horse a little bit, because this team is still a bit of a long shot to make the playoffs. Bengals fans have to be big Steelers fans here on Wednesday so that the Chiefs have something to play for week 18 against Denver. But with that, let's jump up to our second highest tier, the playoff caliber tier. Really good teams that would certainly need some luck if they were to be taken seriously as a Super Bowl team, but kind of never say never type of teams, I suppose. But with that said, my number 12 team here, I think you could make a case, is kind of in its own tier between the group we just talked about and the guys we're about to talk about. I just didn't have room on the graphic here to make a 7th tier. So if you want to use your imagination and imagine that the Houston Texans are kind of in between here, that works for me. But man, just trying to know what you're getting from the Texans on a week-to-week basis is a massive, massive headache. The highs are good. Like, I think CJ Stroud is frankly getting too much criticism for what's going on in Houston. I think CJ Stroud has had some brilliant moments and has overall been really good for a year 2 quarterback. But, you know, defensively, the highs, like what we saw against Miami in week 15, was a spectacular defensive performance where everything kind of came together with the D-line playing great, and this secondary with a guy like Stingley looking like an all-pro type of corner. And then you come out against the Chiefs, and, you know, the offense not consistent enough to carry. Not bad offensively, but not great. And, you know, defensively, I don't think they really held up their end of the bargain against a Chiefs offense that you can slow down this year, right? So, yeah, a very, very frustrating, good football team. But, yeah, just got to, you know, find a way to be more stable. It has been who they are all season long. I don't know if that's necessarily going to change. But especially heading into next year. And they got to figure out how to pick up a damn blitz and a damn stunt. That's been a huge Achilles heel for this team. Compared to last year's team, this was an incredibly sound offensive line in terms of picking up blitzes. Not this year. Like, if you blitz the Texans, it feels like you got a 50-50 chance that you're going to get a free rusher. And they got one against Stroud in a big moment with the game on the line late in this game against the Chiefs. So definitely a tough team to know what to do with. They're going to drop down another spot here as they fall to 9-6. But then the Los Angeles Chargers climbing up 3 spots here. Huge win against Denver. And again, I do think they kind of separated themselves with Herbert playing. You could make a case that it was a top 3 performance of Justin Herbert's career when the stakes are included. You know, I still remember that week 18 game against the Raiders. That was probably his crowning moment to get into the playoffs, or did they end up losing that game outside of his control? But I just remember him making big time throw after big time throw. But leading this comeback against Denver to kind of secure a playoff spot for the Chargers, really, because their final 2 opponents are a joke. I want to say it's Raiders and Giants, or Raiders and Patriots, or something like that. But we have seen this version of Herbert now for like 2 straight months. He's playing the best ball of his career. Just a match made in heaven with Harbaugh. And he's doing it with, you know, Ladd McConkey, Dave Johnson. Like, they have a lot of work to do in terms of adding even more dynamic playmakers. But with a defense that's been super sound really all season, other than that Bucs game where they just got outclassed. But for the most part, this has been an overachieving good defense. And obviously, as we know, if you have a quarterback that can play at an elite level, like, that's the type of stuff I've wanted to see from Herbert for me to kind of make that jump to say he's an elite quarterback. I think you saw some of those flashes like week 6, 7, 8. He cooled off a little bit when his receivers got hurt. And then to see that here late in the year against Denver, it's just a big, big deal. So +3 for the Chargers. And they're going to be a tough out. You know, I still think the talent difference, as we've seen when they've played like the top teams. It's just going to be really tough for them to hang. But you get a bounce here, a bounce there, and Herbert plays like this, they can beat anybody. I do think so. But then I do have the other LA team, the Rams, holding on to this number 10 spot. They've just taken care of business. And what's impressed me about the Rams is it's really been their defense the last couple of weeks against pretty capable offenses, frankly, against the Niners and whatever you want to say about the Jets. Their offense has actually been at worst an average offense, if not an above average offense over the last 5-6 weeks. And this Rams defense has just been suffocating. I think Chris Shula is going to be skyrocketing in terms of the sort of head coach candidate discussion, as it tends to happen seemingly every year with someone on this Rams staff. But this is not a talented defense. It's not. I love what Jared Verse brings to the table. And I know Rams fans will tell you Braden Fisk is a star in the making. I've got my disagreements there. I think this is largely coaching. I think the way that they scheme up this pass rush to get a guy like Braden Fisk to be super productive, and Byron Young as well, a part of that, is really impressive. They come from every different angle. They really do game up their pass rush in a really good way. And honestly, the way they play top down, the way they communicate in the secondary, the way they kind of rally and tackle, that has gotten cleaned up a lot in the last couple of weeks. And it's just a huge testament. I mean, for them to just be average defensively, and that's kind of where they've been for a large part of the season, is at least adequate. And you look at that roster and say, this should have been a bottom 3 defense in the league, and they really haven't been anywhere close to that. So a ton of credit there. And then, we know what they are. Offensively, it's a really good unit that hasn't had to do as much the last couple of weeks. But what that does is brings a lot of balance to this team and makes them a much more serious team come playoff time. And they're looking like they might potentially get as much as the 3 seed in the NFC. And honestly, I obviously don't think they're on the level of your top NFC teams, but they have kind of worked their way through this season and are playing their best ball at the right time and are entering the playoffs as like a real legitimate playoff caliber football team that very well might be 11-6 by the end of all this, which is just another remarkable season from Sean McVay. And then at number 9, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've actually lost 2 straight since we last did this. Not horribly surprising, against the Eagles and the Ravens, 2 great teams. And they didn't have George Pickens. That's a huge deal here. I don't think that's the only thing. I think we all kind of knew in our heart of hearts that this is a really good team, that it's a little different than previous Steelers teams because of the way Russ is playing. But still probably not the high-end potential of your top dogs in the AFC, which I think is fair to say. Even with George Pickens, that's true. But Pickens is a huge part of their offensive identity. And even if guys like Calvin Austin stepped up in this time frame to help them compete, they are just a much better football team with George Pickens, and he is expected back against the Chiefs on Wednesday. So I'm not I'm not going to tank the Steelers. A couple of kind of humbling losses in a row. I don't think anyone's going to disagree that is going to leave them settling in it this year, whereas had they won maybe 1 or 2 of those games, they might have climbed up into the top tier. But they're still, especially getting Pickens back, a damn tough football team. But then the Commanders at number 8, they're going to jump up 1 after beating Philadelphia. And Commanders fans are going to want even more respect than that. Just a couple things there. We're looking at the last 2 weeks. They are also a week away from being a 2-point conversion away from losing to the Saints. So that's a part of this. But also, Jalen Hurts wasn't out there for Philadelphia other than the first drive. He gets taken off the field. So, I'm not trying to take that away from the Commanders. It's just adding context to kind of how I'm looking at them here. But that's not to say that wasn't a huge win. I think that all but cemented their playoff positioning, right? There might be some crazy scenario where the Seahawks and Rams both finish 10-7. The Commanders finished 10-7. I don't know what the tiebreaker is there. Maybe they did clinch, and I should have just looked that up. But they're in the playoffs. Let's be real about this. That alone is just a huge deal from where they started, what the expectations were coming in, and then to see on top of that Jaden Daniels in Philadelphia while Jalen Hurts wasn't playing, that was still the Eagles defense that has been suffocating teams. And to just know, like, okay, you don't just have a guy, you have like him, you have the guy, like Jaden Daniels, like you found one of these quarterbacks that is just special and sets himself above from everybody else. Like he is just so much better than I thought he would be. The touchdown he threw to win that game, let alone how amazing that drive was, but the touchdown throw he had to win the game is the exact throw that I just didn't know was in his bag, having gone through his LSU tape. Like a tight window, like middle of the field anticipation throw with the game on the line in the red zone. Like I've been talking about how that is like the difference in why I ended up being too low on Jaden Daniels, is like attacking the middle of the field. He's been doing that all year, but to do that in that spot against this defense, just a huge reminder of just how good this guy is. And then, you know, yes, okay, Jalen Hurts wasn't out there. Maybe this game changes if he was playing. Beating the Eagles, without getting into too many arguments about how impressive that win was, it's still a huge deal, I think, for the confidence of this team that is very likely at this point staring at a wild card rematch in Philadelphia in 2 weeks, which if we get that, yes, like that game was so fun. You go into that game with the confidence, hey, we just did this a couple weeks ago. I think that's a big deal too. So just a huge week for Washington. I'm not quite ready to put them in the Super Bowl contender tier. I don't trust this defense. They almost just lost to the Saints a week ago. But still, a really good week for Washington. Now, our top tier is changing. These top 7 teams, I think, are really starting to kind of merge with some of the, you know, the teams 4, 5, 6, 7 starting to play their best ball right now. And honestly, the teams that we've had in the top 3, teams like Philly, Buffalo, Detroit, they are starting to kind of get some injuries, fall off a little bit. And I really think we are looking at a very open field right now in terms of the Super Bowl picture. And that's exciting. And one of those teams that's just playing so well that I think has entered this picture is a team that we've been waiting to see this for the majority of what's been an up and down season, but the Green Bay Packers. And I think this all just kind of lines up with the narrative on this team. Heading into the year, it was, okay, last year was shocking how good they were. Jordan Love plays like a superstar at the end of the year. And they come into the year saying, you know, okay, we'll see where this team sits. And can they really emerge as a top-tier Super Bowl contender? Because the potential was there for them to do that. But they get the Jordan Love injury, things with Jeff Hafley's defense. We're up and down to start the year. But my goodness, since the bye week, this has been maybe the most dominant team in football. I don't know, is that controversial? The level of competition hasn't been like insane, but how they're winning these games, it's just complete and utter team dominance from a team that has a lot of completeness about them in terms of roster talent and coaching. The 38-10 victory over the Niners, 30-17 over the Dolphins, including a garbage time touchdown at the end of it. Plays a tight game in Detroit on Thursday Night Football. Then they go into Seattle, win 30-13. And then this week, 34-0 in what was the first shutout game of the season against the Saints. And I'm obviously not saying the Packers are the best team in football. If I felt that way, I would rank them number 1. But what I'm saying is I do think they've played themselves into what their potential always was heading into the year, and that is as a Super Bowl contender. Jordan Love is playing great. He looks healthy. The run game is as good as anybody in the league. Josh Jacobs is incredible. The offensive line, I don't remember the last time the Packers could run block like they can right now. And maybe most importantly is we are talking about a defense that had a complete schematic shift from Joe Barry's defense to Jeff Hafley's defense. It just complete mindset changes. And a defense that has obviously hit its stride now into the second half of the year. So you pair that with the fact that Jair Alexander hasn't even returned to the lineup yet. They're expecting that to happen. And I think the Packers have earned this. I'm curious to hear if you guys agree or disagree with me on that. But definitely an exciting time for Packers fans, heating up here at the absolute best time. And hey, they're going to Minnesota on Sunday for an absolute battle. But then at number 6, the Baltimore Ravens, Kind of a victory lap for the power rankings and my process. Steelers fans certainly weren't happy to see Baltimore consistently ranked ahead of Pittsburgh after Pittsburgh had beaten them and had a better record. But it did definitely feel like Baltimore was going to straighten things out, and you project them forward, and they were the better team, and that was on full display. I don't think George Pickens alone changes the 17-point outcome of that game. Lamar is just able to reach a different height, and Derrick Henry having a monster game against a Steelers defense that's very stout against the run. So, that combination is obviously just insane. Zay Flowers on top of that is just a superstar wide receiver. And this defense has settled in. That was kind of their low point in the season, was the Legion of Room. This team lost some games because of their defense. And, as the Ravens tend to do, they make some tweaks and adjustments and get it figured out. So, this team is definitely scary. And like I said, their arrow is pointing up as some of these other, I think the other teams in the AFC look at least somewhat vulnerable, at least to a team like Baltimore. And between, Ravens, Chiefs, Bills, those are going to be some really tight spreads and really good football games. Hence why the Ravens belong in this tier. Then the Vikings at number 5. I mean, they just continue to impress me. There's just no room to go up. All these teams just keep winning. But yeah, Sam Darnold just keeps doing it. That throw he made to Justin Jefferson with outside leverage, stepping up in the pocket, on top of otherwise having a really good game. I swear to God, if I have to see one more person compare this to Daniel Jones' breakout season and the Giants paying him, I might lose my damn mind. It's like, watch the film, people. Like, Darnold is making good reads. He's making full field progressions. The way I would put it is 14 out of 15 games from Sam Darnold this season, discluding the Jacksonville game that was pretty ugly. Sam Darnold has been better in those 14 games than anything Daniel Jones has done in his entire career, with the exception of that one playoff game against the Vikings, ironically, that got him paid. It's just different. This is a genuinely talented quarterback at 27 years old, figuring things out, and getting to come back to Minnesota and get to talking to a lot of Vikings fans. This is the truly best Vikings team since that Brett Favre team. And if Sam Darnold was just another Case Keenum, for example, or a Daniel Jones or some fluky KOC merchant, that would not be the case. He is elevating what is already a very good football team to legitimate Super Bowl contention. This is a, frankly, dominant football team that absolutely could go on a run. At this point, the biggest thing working against Minnesota, I think, is the Minnesota sports curse. Longest standing city without a championship. Something always seems to go wrong for teams in this state. But they maintain their number 5 spot again because the Chiefs at number 4 are playing really good ball themselves, and they're playing their best ball at the right time. Hey, I love seeing Hollywood Brown back into the lineup. How nice is that to get like I thought if he came back, it was going to be like maybe week 18, he's out there with Carson Wentz and he gets a couple targets. Like, they're going to have legitimate time to kind of see what they have there. Not that he did too much, but Xavier Worthy's playing really well too. He seems to have kind of figured things out. And, Pacheco back in the lineup. They've got some juice now offensively. And you're starting to see, I think, the passing game get better. We know what they have defensively. I feel better about the Chiefs as a top-tier Super Bowl contender, which the last couple of weeks I didn't. I had the Chiefs, along with the last 3 teams we talked about, separated from our top 3 teams. But again, I think the Chiefs, with the last 3 teams we talked about, all trending up, and our next 3 teams, as we'll talk about, at least stagnating or getting a little bit worse. The gap is really closing at an exciting time for NFL fans. But at number 3, I have the Detroit Lions. Moving down 2 spots. You lose to the Bills last week. They did dominate the Bears. Ton of credit for that. Great defensive performance considering what they had to work with. And the offense did their thing. And obviously the Lions were my Super Bowl pick heading into the year. I still think they could do it, but it's just going to be so much harder with these defensive injuries, man. It's just that simple. Aiden Hutchinson was one thing, but then you lose your only other good defensive lineman and Aleem McNeil, and your top corner that was having a great season in Carlton Davis, and a bunch of other injuries stacking up. I mean, I think David Montgomery you didn't feel it so much against the Bears, but in playoff football, like he's your hammer. He's the guy that ends these games, gets you to go on these 6-7 minute drives to put teams away. And I know he's going to try to come back, but that's scary, man. Like 2 doctors said, no, you got to shut it down for the year. He gets a third opinion that says you can maybe try to play. I mean, that's not very encouraging news for me. We'll see, I guess. But it's just tough. Like they had separated themselves, but I think with those injuries, it just brings them a little bit back to the group a little bit. Still, as we've seen, though, this offense just might be good enough to carry them to a Super Bowl. You lose a 42-point game against the Bills, you make your defense almost irrelevant with how good they played offensively from start to finish against the Bears. They are still a machine on that side of the ball. But then Buffalo at number 2, they're going to jump the Lions. They did beat them last week. Going to give them some credit for that. Obviously, all these teams are pretty tight at this point. And I do trust the Bills' defense a little more than the Lions' defense, but that is not a great sign, as I don't think the Bills' defense has been great in recent weeks. Lit up against the Rams, lit up against Detroit. They did enough against New England, but it's not all rainbows and butterflies for Buffalo right now. I obviously love what Josh Allen is doing for the offense. Potential MVP of the league, as that race is tightening up as well with what Lamar's doing. But yeah, I mean, they're jumping up a spot. They are the number 1 team in the AFC. But with those defensive struggles, again, I don't think they are a tier above teams like Kansas City and Buffalo with how things have played out in recent weeks. And then at number 1, this is certainly going to be controversial coming off a loss against Washington. But I have the Eagles number 1. Just trying to think about this rationally. They didn't have Jalen Hurts against Washington. And frankly, I expected Kenny Pickett to play much better than he did stepping in for that offense. And he didn't. Very quickly reminded me just how bad, you thought Jalen Hurts had bad pocket presence. Whew. Kenny Pickett is truly first read and run. The amount of clean pockets he was running out of, killing drives for that Eagles team when they should have easily put this game away against Washington was just infuriating. And I think the other thing you felt is, say whatever you want about Jalen Hurts as a passer, clearly the threat of him as a runner and how they've kind of just perfected that run game with him as a part of it, they didn't have as much success. Saquon breaks the one run off, but Washington was actually able to kind of crowd the box and change the numbers with Hurts out of there. So, you put Hurts back into the lineup. Commanders fans won't like it, but I think you say they probably win that game. Washington probably doesn't get as many chances to come back in that game, let alone Devontae Smith, literally the man that catches everything, drops what would have been a game-ending wide-open slant and just something you certainly don't project to happen again moving forward. And then you go back a week ago, this team dominated Pittsburgh. Now, I think you look at the way the defense played against Washington, they had a hiccup week. They got to clean some stuff up. They had a coverage bust in a really bad spot. And I think the Commanders may have shown that if you attack these corners vertically a little bit more, maybe even like Darius Slay, you can kind of get behind this group. Even though they play top-down Fangio-style coverage, maybe they're cheating up a little bit, trying to, collapse down, and they're actually going to, they're actually a team you can expose over the top. So we'll see if Washington, found something about this defense that you can attack, or if it was just 1 week. But again, I'm putting them at number 1. I do think with Detroit's injuries, with Buffalo's defense showing some serious issues, and I'm not quite ready to push any of these other teams above Philadelphia, I'm still going to leave them at number 1. And I'm willing to kind of not overreact to the loss against Washington. So that'll probably be a controversial way to end this, but I'm curious to hear if you guys agree with Philly at number 1 or what. And that's going to do it. I don't know if I will have Week 18 NFL Power Rankings. It might come down to if I have massive changes and enough to talk about. I will probably be it's just crazy with the holidays right now, not just the move, but we're going to be going to Chicago to visit my wife's family on the days after Christmas. So I'll be again kind of on the road. And then again, I'll be settling back in on January 1st. So I don't know if we'll have Power Rankings next week or not. Just I appreciate you guys staying patient with me on that. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below where you agree, where you disagree. And we are out of here. Happy holidays, everybody. Enjoy what should be a good week of football. And I'll see you when I see you. Peace out.